Everyone's thought about what they'd do with a time machine, right? Go see the Library of Alexandria, shake hands with Jesus, kill Hitler. I'm still hung up on seeing Hong Xiuquan's demon-slaying swords myself. But when I was a kid, I was always the one trying to game the system. I was the one who thought he could show up in the ancient world with a handgun and go pew pew and become a god. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. Scalagrim did a good video on why, but basically, people don't become stupid just because they don't have technology, and technological advantage doesn't make you invincible against a complicated society of people. So why does this idea still stick around? Well, because there are always exceptions, and at one point in history, it kinda happened. This video is brought to you by Magellan TV. Magellan TV is a documentary streaming service made by filmmakers and home to the series of films by the same people that brought you Sandor Clegane as Attila the Hun, and they have one on Cortes! What'd I tell you, I got material here for months. They're so... seeing the glory of Tenochtitlan on screen is, but then they also have all these unintentionally hilarious moments.
Your religion is an abomination.
This is sacrilege.
It's the perfect combo, although they're a little more generous towards Cortes as a person than I am. I've also been watching Battle Castle, which if you want to see just how smart people of the pre-modern era were, wow, watch that one. If you want to check it out, you can go to magellantv.com/JackRackham and get 1 free month of membership to their library of over 3,000 documentaries. So Hernan Cortes was a teenager in Spain when news comes back from Columbus's voyage to the New World, and in some ways it was kinda like the Wild West, which is to say someone from a respectable family like Cortes was supposed to stay in the city and study law so he could one day live in a fancy palace with crystal knobs and big ol' knockers. My god, Anna. But the frontier was so exciting and ripe with opportunity that Cortes decides, screw you, Mom and Dad, I'm getting a one-way ticket to adventure. On his journey across the Atlantic, he met a great role model in the form of his ship captain, who lied to his superiors and left early so he could get first dibs on land in Hispaniola, because, yeah, that was one of the perks of citizenship, you just get a bunch of free land. And since Cortes is related to the governor, he quickly gets himself an encomienda, which is to say a bunch of people who used to live on his land who now do all the work for him. Just like the Wild West, really roughing it out on his own. And technically those people weren't really slaves because in exchange for spending the rest of their life on a plantation, they were being given Jesus. Basically, it's like that picture of the fake tip that's really just a piece of paper asking you to read the Bible, except every day and forever. A few years later, Cortes got to go on a trip to conquer Cuba, and he gets more land and more slaves, but being a man of the people, he complained to the governor saying that everyone should get even more slaves. In fact, he gets so rich and pesters the governor so much that Governor Velasquez has to find a way to get rid of him, and so he puts him in charge of an expedition to Mexico. Except he quickly realizes that would mean Cortes would become a governor, and Velasquez is not ready to deal with that shit, and he sends someone else to replace him. But Cortes is sitting at the harbor with 11 ships and 630 guys and decides, screw it, because why settle for being one of the wealthiest men in Cuba when you can chase rumors of gold? Now this was one of the things I found most surprising. Cortes wasn't a part of the Spanish army. Spain didn't even send its army to the New World. King Charles was busy duking it out with the French over Italy. Their strategy was pretty much to vassal swarm 2 entire continents and hope for the best. And Cortes didn't even have a license, meaning he was literally just some guy with 1 moderately sized high school's worth of fugitives who happened to cripple one of the greatest pre-Columbian civilizations in the Americas. But before he does that, he makes a stop off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. Why the Yucatan? Well, because the Yucatan was home to the decaying remains of the Maya civilization, which you'd think would be a lot easier to handle. Turns out there's no gold, but he picked up a couple translators, a white guy who shipwrecked a few years ago and can translate Spanish into Yucatec, and a local woman who becomes Cortes's mistress who can translate Yucatec into Nahuatl. So basically, when Cortes found the Aztecs, he had to play the world's highest stakes game of telephone just to ask for directions. He needs to hurry up and conquer something though, because A, that high school's worth of fugitives are expecting to get paid in something, and B, the only way he's ever going back to Spain is if he can give King Charles a bunch of new territory. As a matter of fact, some of his men had already tried to turn on him, so in response, he sank all of his ships. They were either going to take down an entire empire or die painfully trying. It's at this point we pull a big meanwhile and cut to Aztec Emperor Moctezuma. Quick rundown on his reign: his ancestors did a bunch of conquering and he wanted to hold on to everything, so he became super elitist and made his wars less about taking territory and more about taking prisoners for human sacrifice, which there are anthropological arguments you could make that it was kind of like Greek hoplites settling disputes by running into each other until enough of them died, just with extra steps, but yeah, don't get me wrong, it was hella messed up. Made him a lot of enemies too. But more than anything, he was superstitious, like way more than anyone else in his court. For instance, when the Aztecs come into contact with cannons, they kinda get how it works, and eventually they learn how to run to the side or, duck. But when Moctezuma hears about great mountains appearing off the coast filled with men covered in iron and hair of gold, he thinks to himself,
"By the gods, it's Quetzalcoatl!"
At which point his courtiers were probably like,
Whoa, let's not be too hasty here. I mean, that could have some pretty serious implications.
Oh yeah, then explain how the temple burned down last year.
Well, that's natural disaster. That's why we have State Farm.
And what about the searing flame that ripped through our sky some 10 years ago?
I don't know, man. Astronomy?
And what about that creepy woman who wanders the streets at night, wailing an ominous prophecy? My children, we're all doomed!
Yeah, that's pretty creepy, but I don't really see how it applies.
Ultimately, Moctezuma sends an envoy and dresses Cortes like a god, adorning him with a turquoise mask and quetzal feathers, a golden collar, a shield made from mother of pearl, and Cortes asks, "Is that it? I don't know, I'm not even sure you're worth conquering. Give us a fight, let's see how easy it'll be."
Wait. We're just here to give you gifts. We are not gonna kill someone who may or may not be a god.
Oh yeah, we're sacking the shit out of this place. And the first thing they do is get themselves surrounded in the middle of Aztec territory. But lucky for them, right in the middle of Aztec territory was a group of 200 cities who hated the Aztecs' guts. They figure the Spanish are worth more as allies than as corpses. They cement their friendship by massacring a sacred city, and they waltz straight on into Tenochtitlan, a marvel of engineering, bigger than any city in Europe except maybe Constantinople. And Moctezuma gives them the complete tour, shows them where all the gold is, and hands them the keys. Except what's the first thing they do? They walk up to the biggest, tallest temple in Tenochtitlan and ask to put a giant cross on top along with a portrait of the Virgin Mary, which would be the equivalent of walking into the Vatican and going, looks nice, but I think it needs a 50-foot statue of Shiva. The Aztecs are tipped off that maybe this guy isn't part of their pantheon. They're done with Moctezuma's BS and they slaughter a handful of conquistadors. In response, Cortes pulls a pro-gamer move and kidnaps the emperor. Moctezuma, though, instead of organizing a resistance, he just spends all day playing board games with his new Spanish friends. But rotten luck, Velázquez sent another batch of conquistadors to hunt down Cortes, so Cortes explicitly commands his least competent guards to watch Moctezuma while he and the rest ambush the army from Cuba. And he gives them a proposition. I could kill you, or I know where you could find a lot of shiny. And then they go back to Tenochtitlan and the whole thing's on fire. Cortes fights his way in and discovered it's because the Spaniards killed some people and everyone rose up and installed Moctezuma's brother as emperor because he promised to do more than literally nothing. Cortes is like, Moctezuma, do something! And Moctezuma goes out onto the balcony to say,
Friends, Mexica, countrymen, I know we've had our differences.
And that was the end for Moctezuma. And then there's a really cool action sequence where Cortes has to escape the city and the Mexica pull up all the bridges so they have to build their way across, but this video is getting pretty long. Long story short, they lost all their gold, and then that's the moment in history that gets commemorated as the Night of Sorrow. Luckily, the Spanish left a little present behind called smallpox, and it does all the hard work for them by killing a huge chunk of the population, as well as the new emperor, while they build full-sized sailing ships, drag them onto the lake, and blast the crap out of Tenochtitlan with cannons until it's a smoking pile of rubble. But now, it's a Spanish pile of rubble. And there's a cool moment where he kind of realizes this in the film. It's the right sentiment, but I feel like it's a bit of a stretch coming from the guy who's responsible for blowing it up in the first place. But man, if it isn't moody as all get up. So, end of the day, Cortes snubs Velasquez, gets his governorship, and then complains he hasn't been rewarded enough while flagrantly detailing to the king how he disobeyed orders, and then gives himself as much land and as many slaves as he can get away with. Meanwhile, his wife dies under mysterious circumstances and he marries somebody richer so he can build himself a palace with all the knockers a man could ever ask for. Probably made things awkward for the mother of his only child, who spent the entire fight against the Aztecs working as his translator and closest companion, especially when he then invited her to do the same thing in Honduras after the fact. So if Cortes conquering the Aztecs was a critically acclaimed Oscar-winning film of the decade, Cortes's expedition to Honduras is its direct-to-DVD sequel. Cortes sends this guy Cristobal on an expedition to conquer Honduras, but would you believe it? Cristobal declares independence and tries to claim Honduras for himself, that scoundrel! Somehow this must be the work of that dirty, dirty Velasquez. And so Cortes has to go to Honduras to conquer it himself before Cristobal can get away with it. And he brings along his ex-lover and also Moctezuma's cousin, who was the last Aztec emperor because he didn't want him causing any trouble in Mexico. Perfect for an awkward love triangle nobody asked for. And together they trudge through the jungle and then find out Cristobal's officers already put down the rebellion, and so they all go home, except for the emperor because Cortes murdered him. And then he got all his stuff taken away because he was getting too powerful and nobody liked him, and so he complains to King Charles, telling him what a good job he was doing paving over that city he destroyed. And so he got some land back, but not the governor job, and then he bounces around Baja California, goes to fight the Ottomans in Algeria, and then goes back to Mexico where he died under a mountain of debt.